April 15th, 1963, 6:45 in the evening, and Frank Lucas is parking a Cadillac in front of a segregated restaurant deep in Mississippi territory where black men don't usually walk out alive. Bumpy Johnson sits in the passenger seat, his face carved from stone, and Frank can feel the weight of what they're about to do pressing down on his chest like a physical thing. 20 members of the Ku Klux Klan are waiting inside that building, and Frank has been Bumpy's right hand for 6 years now, long enough to know that when his boss gets that look in his eyes, there's no talking him out of anything. "Boss," Frank says, his hand already moving toward the pistol tucked inside his jacket. "This is suicide. 20 of them. 2 of us." Bumpy adjusts his tie in the rearview mirror, taking his time, and that's how Frank knows his mind is already made up. "That's exactly why we're going in," Bumpy says, his voice carrying that particular calm that comes before violence. "If we turn back now, every clavern from here to Memphis will think they can push us around. Territory isn't just about corners and product, Frank. It's about respect, and respect dies the moment you show fear." They walk through that restaurant door together, and Frank's eyes adjust to the dim lighting, taking in the scene with the practiced assessment of a man who survived Harlem's streets by reading rooms before rooms read him. 20 white men scattered across tables, some still bearing the red marks around their necks where Klan hoods sat just hours before. And at the center table sits Robert Shelton himself, Imperial Wizard, a man whose smile doesn't reach past his lips, let alone his eyes. "Mr. Johnson," Shelton says, standing with exaggerated courtesy that drips with mockery, "what an honor to have you in our humble establishment." The other men don't stand, don't pretend at civility. They just watch with eyes that have seen too many lynchings, participated in too many midnight raids. This meeting is supposed to be about territory, about Bumpy expanding his operations southward, about the changing economics of the drug trade in 1963 when civil rights are tearing old systems apart and creating new opportunities in the chaos. The Klan doesn't want change, doesn't want northern black operators in their backyard, but Bumpy Johnson isn't asking permission. He's simply informing them of reality. They sit, and the tension in that room is electric enough to taste, metallic and sharp like blood or fear or both. Shelton cuts into his steak, the knife scraping against porcelain, and says without looking up, "You colored folks need to understand your place in this world. We've maintained order in the South for generations, and we're not about to let some Harlem gangster upset that balance." Bumpy leans back in his chair, completely relaxed. A man who has stared down worse threats than this in rooms more dangerous than this, and he says, "Times are changing, whether you want them to or not. You can either adapt and find your place in the new order, or you can resist and get crushed beneath it. History doesn't care about your feelings, Shelton. It just moves forward." 20 pairs of eyes lock on Bumpy with hatred so pure it feels religious, and Frank understands in that moment that these men didn't come here to negotiate. They came here to make a point, to remind a black man from up north that down here, they still control life and death. The food arrives, thick steaks and potatoes and green beans, and this is where 6 years of loyalty becomes automatic reflex. Frank reaches across and takes Bumpy's plate before his boss can even move, because this is protocol. This is how Frank has kept Bumpy alive through dozens of meetings with men who smile while plotting murder. "Let me check this first, boss," Frank says, cutting into the steak, and he's watching the Klan members as he raises the fork to his mouth, looking for tells, for the slight smile or nervous glance that betrays poisoning or tampering. Nothing. They just watch with dead eyes. The steak tastes normal, seasoned well, cooked medium rare, and Frank takes another bite, bigger this time, thorough in his testing because Bumpy's life depends on his diligence. He swallows, waits 5 seconds, 10 seconds, and says, "It's clean." Then 15 seconds pass, and Frank feels something that isn't quite pain. Not yet, but wrong in a way that makes his body scream danger before his mind catches up. Not burning, worse than burning, like something is tearing his stomach apart from the inside, like his organs are dissolving in acid. He tries to stand, but his legs won't work, and the glass in his hand shatters against the floor as his muscles spasm out of control. Frank? Bumpy's voice comes from very far away, and Frank is on his knees now, convulsing so violently that he can feel his teeth cracking against each other, and white foam starts pouring from his mouth. Except it's not staying white, it's turning pink, then red, pure red, because he's vomiting blood from somewhere deep inside. His eyes roll back, and the last thing he sees before consciousness starts slipping is Robert Shelton's smile, that same smile. But now there's satisfaction in it, triumph, the look of a man watching his plan succeed. Such a shame, Shelton says, his voice floating down like he's speaking from heaven or hell. Seems the food didn't agree with him. Bumpy catches Frank as he falls, but Frank's body is seizing so hard that holding him is like trying to hold lightning, and Bumpy's voice cuts through the room with the authority of a man who's run Harlem for 2 decades. Someone call an ambulance! Nobody moves. 20 men just sit there watching, some of them openly smiling now, enjoying the entertainment, the spectacle of a black man dying on their floor. Bumpy pulls his pistol in one smooth motion and puts it against Shelton's temple, thumb on the hammer, and his voice drops to something cold and final. Call now or everyone in this room dies, starting with you. A waiter breaks the frozen moment, runs to the phone, and Bumpy is on the floor now, cradling Frank like a child, watching blood pour from his lieutenant's ears, his nose, watching his eyes turn glassy with approaching death. The ambulance takes 18 minutes to arrive, and those are the longest 18 minutes of Bumpy's life, watching Frank convulse and vomit and bleed, watching a man who's been loyal beyond question, who's taken bullets in prison time and never once complained, dying because he tasted food meant for Bumpy's mouth. When they finally reach the segregated hospital, the white doctors take one look at Frank and hesitate, actually hesitate, and one of them says, "He's colored," like that explains something, like that justifies standing there while a man bleeds from every orifice. Bumpy doesn't yell, doesn't threaten. He just looks at them with eyes that have seen and caused more death than they can imagine, and says very quietly, "Do your job, or learn what real suffering looks like." They take Frank to emergency, and Dr. Mitchell, an older black physician, takes over the case. He works fast, pumping Frank's stomach, injecting antidotes, fighting against whatever poison is destroying Frank's body from the inside. And after 30 minutes he emerges with a face that tells Bumpy everything before words do. "Mr. Johnson," the doctor says, "it was poison. Arsenic mixed with strychnine. Massive dose, the kind that kills in minutes, not hours. If you enjoy learning more about stories from the American Mafia underworld, click the button and subscribe to our channel." "But he's still alive," Bumpy says, "and it's not a question. It's a demand for explanation." "Barely," Dr. Mitchell admits. "His organs are failing. Liver and kidneys destroyed. The poison worked exactly as designed, just slower because of his size and constitution." Bumpy walks into the treatment room and sees Frank yellow and swollen and covered in sweat, tubes running everywhere, machines beeping their desperate warnings. "Frank," he says, sitting beside the bed, "look at me." Frank's eyes flutter open, clouded with pain and medication, barely focusing. "Boss," he whispers, each word costing him everything. "The steak, it was meant for you." "I know," Bumpy says. "You saved my life, and now I'm going to save yours." Frank coughs blood onto his chin and his next words come out broken. "Maria, the kids, take care of them." "You'll take care of them yourself," Bumpy says with absolute certainty. "You're going to survive this." Dr. Mitchell touches Bumpy's shoulder, gestures toward the hallway, and they step outside where the fluorescent lights hum and flicker. "How long does he have?" Bumpy asks, because he needs truth, not comfort. "Hours," the doctor says. "Maybe less. The poison completely destroyed his liver and kidneys. Without those organs functioning, the toxins will kill him. There's no stopping it." Bumpy is quiet for a moment, thinking, calculating, and then he asks, "What if we get him new organs?" Dr. Mitchell stares at him like he suggested flying to the moon. "Transplant? Mr. Johnson, this is 1963. Organ transplantation is experimental, theoretical. It's never been successfully done with liver and kidneys simultaneously. The complexity alone makes it nearly impossible, and the chances of survival even in ideal circumstances are less than 5%. "And what would you need?" Bumpy asks, ignoring the statistics because statistics are for people who accept limitations, and Bumpy Johnson built an empire by refusing to accept what others called impossible. "Compatible donors," the doctor says. "Blood typing, tissue matching, surgical team, equipment. And even if we had all that, it would take days to organize, days to test compatibility, days that Frank doesn't have." Bumpy looks through the window at Frank dying on that bed, at the man who threw himself between Bumpy and death without hesitation, and something crystallizes in his mind with perfect, cold clarity. "Then we'll do it our way," he says. At 9:30 that night, Bumpy walks out of the hospital and makes phone calls, reaching into a network built over 30 years of operating in the shadows, calling in favors from men who owe him debts that can never be fully repaid. A senator whose career Bumpy saved, a black sheriff who hates the Klan more than he loves the law, a federal judge whose brother was lynched in Mississippi in 1955. By 11 o'clock, they've located Robert Shelton at his farm, surrounded by armed guards, protected by men who believe their cause makes them invincible. The firefight is brief and brutal. 3 Klan members dead, 2 of Bumpy's men wounded. But they take Shelton alive, drag him out of his house screaming about rights and laws and protection. And Bumpy just listens in silence because men like Shelton talk about rights while denying them to everyone else, talk about law while operating outside it. And the hypocrisy is so thick, it's almost funny. They bring Shelton to the hospital through the back entrance, down to the basement where the morgue operates, where bodies wait in silence for processing. Dr. Mitchell is there, pale and trembling, and when he sees Shelton bound and gagged, he understands immediately what Bumpy is planning. "Mr. Johnson," he says, his voice shaking, "what are you doing?" Bumpy's answer is simple and final. "You said Frank needs a liver and kidneys. Here's your donor." The doctor stares, and you can see every year of medical school, every oath he's taken, every principle he's built his life around, colliding with the reality of Frank dying upstairs and the man who poisoned him right here in front of him. "This is murder," he finally says. "Taking organs by force, killing a man to save another. That's not medicine, that's barbarism." Bumpy turns to face him fully, and his voice carries no anger, no heat, just cold calculation. Murder is poisoning a man during a peace negotiation. Murder is what Shelton has done dozens of times to people who couldn't fight back. This isn't murder, doctor. This is justice. Ugly justice. Brutal justice. But justice nonetheless. "I made an oath," Dr. Mitchell says, but his voice is weakening. "First, do no harm. And if you let Frank die when you have the means to save him," Bumpy asks, "aren't you breaking that oath? You have a choice right now. Let Frank Lucas, a father of 3, die because you're too afraid to cross lines, or save him using the organs of a man who tried to kill him. What's your oath worth when you let good men die to protect evil ones?" The doctor looks at Shelton, then up at the ceiling where Frank is dying, then back at Bumpy, and something breaks inside him. Some wall between the man he was raised to be and the man this moment demands. "I'll need a team," he finally says, "and a lot of blood." Bumpy nods, already moving, making calls, pulling together 3 other black doctors, men who've all lost someone to racial violence, men who understand that sometimes the system doesn't provide justice, so you have to make your own. Midnight arrives, and that basement transforms into an improvised surgical suite. Equipment rolled in quietly, lights repositioned, tables prepared. Shelton is sedated, but not completely, because Bumpy wants him aware on some level, wants him to feel something of what he inflicted on Frank. One of the doctors, a young man from Chicago, whispers, "This is wrong. This crosses every ethical line." And Bumpy doesn't argue, doesn't justify. He just says, "Frank Lucas proved my food for 6 years. He took a poison meant for me, and now he's dying because of his loyalty. You tell me what ethics say about letting him die when we can save him." The surgery begins with Dr. Mitchell making the first incision, his hands steady despite everything, because whatever moral reservations he has, His surgical skill remains intact. They work systematically, removing Shelton's liver first, then his kidneys, preserving them in ice and solution. And Shelton wakes up partway through, his eyes going wide with understanding and horror, screaming through the gag as he realizes what's happening to him, what's being taken. And Bumpy watches every second of it, his face expressionless. Because this is what loyalty looks like when it becomes absolute, when it crosses from principle into obsession. 4 hours later, at 4 in the morning, they finish with Shelton. He's technically alive, heart still beating, lungs still drawing breath, but without liver and kidneys, he has hours at most, maybe a day if his body fights hard. "Leave him here," Bumpy orders. "Let him watch while his organs save the life of the man he tried to kill. Let him understand what it means to fail." Then they move upstairs to Frank, and this surgery is exponentially more complex. This is medical science operating at the edge of human knowledge in 1963, transplanting multiple organs simultaneously when the procedures barely exist, when success rates are theoretical at best. Dr. Mitchell and his team work in focused silence, connecting arteries smaller than thread, suturing with precision measured in fractions of millimeters, praying to whatever gods they believe in that Frank's body accepts these foreign organs. That tissue rejection doesn't kill him in the next few hours. 8 in the morning, April 16th, and Frank has been on that operating table for 4 hours. Bumpy hasn't left the room, hasn't sat down, hasn't closed his eyes. He's just stood there watching, waiting. Because Frank waited for him through 6 years of loyalty, so Bumpy can wait through 6 hours of surgery. At 9:15, a monitor screams its alarm, that long, sustained tone that means cardiac arrest, and Dr. Mitchell shouts, "We're losing him, pressure dropping." And they're working frantically now. Medications pushed, chest compressions, electric shocks delivered directly to Frank's heart. 2 full minutes of desperate intervention while Bumpy watches his lieutenant die and come back and die again. Then, bip, bip, bip. Normal cardiac rhythm restored, and Dr. Mitchell's voice comes out as a whisper of disbelief. The organs are taking. My God, they're actually working. Even 2 more hours of surgery to close Frank up, to ensure every connection is solid, every suture will hold. And at 11:20 they step back from the table and Frank Lucas is alive, yellow and swollen and covered in scars that will mark him forever. But alive and breathing, and his body is accepting the organs that came from his attempted murderer. Down in the basement, Robert Shelton dies alone in the dark, his vital organs now inside a black man's body, keeping that man alive, and there's a poetry to it that Bumpy appreciates even if nobody else will. 2 days later, April 18th, Frank wakes up confused and in pain but aware, his eyes focusing on Bumpy sitting beside the bed, and his first word is a question. "Boss?" "I'm here," Bumpy says. "Did I survive?" Frank asks, and it's the question of a man who remembers dying, who felt death approaching and expected it to finish the job. "You survived," Bumpy confirms. "How?" Frank asks, because the poison was fatal. He knows it was fatal. He felt it destroying him from inside. Bumpy is quiet for a long moment, measuring what truth looks like, what honesty demands, and finally he says, "You don't want to know the details, Frank. You're alive. That's what matters." But Frank presses, because 6 years of loyalty has earned him truth even when truth is ugly. And so Bumpy tells him about the forced transplant, about Shelton's organs, about the surgery that shouldn't have worked but did. Frank processes this in silence, his hands moving to the scars on his abdomen, feeling the stitches, the foreign presence inside him, and when he finally speaks, his voice is hollow. "He tried to kill me, poisoned me like a coward, and now pieces of him are keeping me alive. Poetic justice," Bumpy says. Frank closes his eyes and you can see him wrestling with this reality, with the moral weight of surviving through violence, of living because someone else was killed and harvested. "Boss," he says eventually, "I don't know if I can live with this." Bumpy leans forward, his voice firm but not unkind. "You will live with it, because you have a wife and 3 children who need their father. Because the best revenge against a white supremacist isn't dying and proving him right. It's living, thriving, building an empire while carrying pieces of him inside you. Every breath you take is proof that his hatred failed. Every day you're alive is a defeat for everything he believed in. Frank opens his eyes and something shifts in them, some acceptance of this dark bargain he never asked for but now must carry. "When can I see my family?" he asks. And that's how Bumpy knows Frank has chosen to live with it, to carry this burden because the alternative is abandoning the people who love him. May 1963, and Frank walks out of that hospital weak and scarred but alive, and word spreads through the underworld in whispers that never get confirmed, but everyone believes. Bumpy Johnson cut open a Klan leader to save his lieutenant. The message is clear to every organization from New York to New Orleans. You don't touch Bumpy Johnson's family, you don't threaten his people, because he will cross every line, violate every rule, commit every sin necessary to protect them. The Klan tries to retaliate, they try violence and intimidation. But Bumpy is ready, has been planning since Frank first woke up, and in 1 week 3 Klan cells are eliminated, 5 leaders disappear into the Mississippi night and never return. Within 6 months, the Klan's presence in Mississippi shrinks by half, not because of federal intervention or civil rights legislation, but because one Harlem gangster demonstrated that he plays by different rules, that he's willing to be more ruthless than anyone else when protecting what's his. Frank returns to work in August, moving carefully at first, favoring his right side where the scars pull tight, but getting stronger each week. He touches his abdomen sometimes when he thinks nobody's watching, feeling the raised tissue, remembering what's inside him. Pieces of the man who tried to kill him now, keeping him alive. And there's something darkly satisfying about that, about surviving through the very flesh of your enemy. October 1963, and Maria gives birth to their 4th child, a boy. And when the nurse asks for the name, Frank looks at Bumpy standing in the waiting room and says, "Ellsworth. Ellsworth Lucas, after the man who gave me a second life." That child grows up hearing stories about his father's loyalty, about the boss who moved heaven and earth to save him. But the details stay vague, protected by silence and understanding, because some truths are too dark to speak out loud, even when everyone knows them. Years pass, decades, and in 1984 a documentary crew is interviewing Frank Lucas about Bumpy Johnson's legacy, about the Harlem they remember, and the interviewer, a young white man who thinks he understands the streets, asks the question everyone wants answered. Is it true? About the forced transplant? About you carrying Robert Shelton's organs? Frank is 71 years old now, his hair gray, his body marked by time and violence and survival, and he opens his shirt slowly, showing scars that never faded, that mark him like a map of loyalty and sacrifice. "I'm alive, aren't I?" he says. In 1963, simultaneous liver and kidney transplant was impossible. Medical science said it couldn't be done. But Bumpy Johnson didn't believe in impossible. He believed in loyalty. "I tasted his food, took his poison, and he moved heaven and earth, crossed every moral line, violated every law, to keep me breathing." That's brotherhood. That's family. That's what loyalty looks like when it becomes absolute. The interviewer presses, wants the moral complexity, wants Frank to express regret or conflict and asks, "Do you regret it? Living with a Klan member's organs inside you?" Frank smiles, and it's not a happy smile. It's the smile of a man who's survived things that should have killed him, who's carried impossible burdens and kept walking. "Every day I wake up," he says, "every time I see my children, my grandchildren, I remember that their poison failed, that their hatred didn't kill me, that pieces of the man who tried to destroy me now keep me strong, keep me alive. It's not regret, it's triumph. It's proof that you can take everything from your enemy, even their body, and use it to build the life they wanted to end." The camera holds on his face, on the scars visible beneath his open collar, on eyes that have seen death and came back, and there's something in that moment that captures everything about survival, about loyalty, about the brutal mathematics of power in places where law doesn't reach and justice becomes whatever you can take and hold. Frank Lucas lived until 2019, carrying Robert Shelton's organs for 56 years, outliving his attempted murderer by half a century, building a drug empire, raising 4 children, seeing grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of it made possible because Bumpy Johnson looked at an impossible situation and decided that impossible just meant nobody had been desperate enough yet. That's the legacy, not the violence or the crime or the darkness, but the absolute unwavering loyalty, the willingness to cross any line to protect family. Bumpy Johnson died in 1968, and Frank carried his coffin alongside 5 other men. And when they asked him to say words at the funeral, Frank touched his scars beneath his suit and said simply, "He gave me life twice, once when he took me in, and once when he refused to let me die. Everything I am, everything I built, I carry because of him." That's the story of Frank Lucas and the transplant that shouldn't have worked, the surgery that violated every rule, the revenge that looked like salvation. History remembers Bumpy Johnson as a gangster, a criminal, a violent man. But the people who knew him, who lived in his shadow and under his protection, they remember something different. They remember a man who believed that loyalty demanded everything, that family meant more than law, that sometimes saving a life requires destroying another. And they remember that in 1963, when medical science said impossible, when society said a black man's life wasn't worth saving, Bumpy Johnson said otherwise and made the world bend to his will through sheer force of determination and the willingness to pay any price, cross any line, break any rule. That's the story. That's the truth. That's what loyalty looked like when it became religion, when it transformed from principle to obsession, to the single most important thing in a violent world that tried to teach men like Bumpy Johnson that black lives were disposable. He refused to learn that lesson, and Frank Lucas lived 56 years longer because of that refusal, carrying his enemy's organs as proof that hatred can be turned against itself, that supremacy can be harvested and used to save the very lives it tried to end. If you enjoyed our content, consider clicking the button and subscribing. It helps us a lot.